I'll never forget the moment my own son asked me to step away from the window. He didn't say it with embarrassment, he said it with disgust. I had the paintbrush in my hand, paint dripping down my fingers, and the afternoon light was hitting my face. I looked at him confused, thinking it was a joke, but when he repeated the line, "Get away, Dad. If someone sees you, they'll know I'm the son of some poor old man," I felt something inside me crumble harder than any old drywall. My name is Alex Martin. I'm 62 years old, and what little I have left in this life is in my hands, shaky hands stained by years of work, by plaster, by cement, by cold, and by hunger. I've been a blue-collar guy, a handyman, almost my entire existence. I built other people's houses, painted ceilings that never belonged to me, and laid the foundations for homes that were never mine. My only real project, my true work, was Ryan, my son. He was the one piece of work I cared about most, the one I tried to protect from the dust of being poor, and yet he was the one who cracked the fastest. That day, I'd gone to his new house, excited to help him make it beautiful. He had called me 2 weeks before. "Dad, I'm getting the keys to the new place. Could you come help with the painting?" "You're good at that," he said over the phone, his tone almost friendly. My eyes lit up, not because of the work, but because he had asked me, after so long without asking for anything. So I grabbed my old tools, my worn-out brushes, and I went like a man heading to a meeting with his past. But before we go on, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to the channel and if you're enjoying this story. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy the stories I put my heart into preparing. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. All right, let's continue. When I got there, Ryan was with his girlfriend, Caroline. She was one of those women who doesn't need to say she looks down on you. You can see it in her eyes. She looked me up and down, covered her nose as if the smell of the paint was my fault, and went back to checking her phone. I pretended not to notice. I smiled, because you learn that silence is the only shield you have left when life has taken your voice. "Dad, put on these gloves," Ryan told me. "I don't want you to stain the new floor." I nodded. I wasn't even offended. I was just so happy to be helping him that any word from him felt like a sacred order. So I started painting. The white paint covered the wall slowly, as if it wanted to erase my history and start a new one. As I passed the roller, I could hear him talking with Caroline. My dad worked construction his whole life, but he never wanted to learn anything modern. She replied, "Well, at least he taught you how to work hard, right?" And they both laughed. The sound of that laugh hit me like a nail in the chest. The afternoon sun was pouring through the window, and without thinking, I got close to wipe down the frame. That's when he said it, cold, dry, without hesitating. "Get away from the window, Dad. If someone sees you, they'll know I'm the son of some poor old man." I looked at him, not with anger, but with disbelief. For a few seconds, all the noise in the world just disappeared. I could only hear my heart pounding in my ears. My son, the same boy I had carried in my arms, the one I had taught to hold a paintbrush, was asking me to hide, to erase myself from his life. I swallowed hard. I didn't say a word. I just looked down, wiped the drop of paint that was running down my hand, and went back to painting. Every stroke was a way of not crying, of not letting the tremor in my hands show, of continuing to be his father, even if he had stopped being my son in that instant. The rest of the day was a long silence. Caroline left early, and Ryan shut himself in a room, talking on the phone about decoration, furniture, curtains. Nothing he said had anything to do with me. I just stayed in the living room, working until the light was gone. That night I went home, my back killing me, my hands numb, and my heart turned to dust. I sat in the kitchen chair, the same one my wife used before she passed, and I just stared at my paint-stained fingers. I thought about what my son said, over and over. Every time I replayed it in my head, it hurt more. "If someone sees you, they'll know I'm the son of some poor old man." I didn't know what hurt more, his shame or my silence. And right there, in that moment of absolute loneliness, I understood something. Kids can forget love, but they should never forget who taught them how to love. I hadn't lost him yet. He'd lost himself. I stayed up until dawn, looking at my tools, thinking about everything I had done for him. And without knowing it, that night, something started inside me. An idea, a purpose, a small spark that would soon become a fire. Because sometimes, when a son wounds a father's heart, what ignites isn't spite. It's the need to teach one last lesson, one that can't be painted over. I've always liked my hands, not because they're pretty, but because they're real. Every scar told a story, every callus had a reason, and every stain was a memory of something I built with love. My hands raised walls, carried lumber, supported other people's dreams, and they also cradled my son when he was just a warm little bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. He was born in the city hospital on a cold June night. I was 28, and even though I didn't have money or a diploma, I swore that kid would never know the shame of poverty. And I kept that promise, at least for a while. I remember those years as a constant sound of hammers mixed with the smell of plaster and sweat. I worked from sunup until the moon was high in the sky. It didn't matter if it was raining or if my knees ached, because every day meant one more brick in the foundation of Ryan's future. When I watched him sleep, it was all worth it. I'd stroke his hair and promise him in silence, "You're not going to go through what I went through, son. You're going to have a house, books, an education, and respect." His mother, Clara, was a woman with a sweet voice and soft hands. She used to say I had my soul in my fingers. Whenever she saw me come home covered in dust, she'd hug me just the same, never afraid of getting dirty. "Don't work so much, Alex," she'd say. "The boy needs you more than he needs the money." And I'd smile, because in my head, the money was my way of being present, even when I couldn't be there. Clara didn't understand it then, but she never held it against me. She was one of those women who love unconditionally, with the kind of patience only good souls know. When Ryan turned 10, I took him to a job site for the first time. I put a small hard hat on him and let him hold a paintbrush. "Look, son," I told him, "paint covers the walls, but it doesn't erase what's underneath." He looked at me with those big, curious eyes. "And what's underneath, Dad?" "Work, son. And work is also love." For years, that phrase was mine, but now when I remember it, it hurts. Because the boy who admired my hands, the same one who used to fall asleep on my chest, ended up rejecting the very thing that defined me. When Clara got sick, Ryan was already in college. He was studying architecture in a big city on a scholarship, and we were so proud. We'd send him letters and what little cash we could spare, and every so often we'd get photos. Him, standing in front of modern buildings with a wide smile and clean clothes. Clara would tape them to the dining room wall like they were trophies. She said one day when he graduated, he'd come back and build us the house we always dreamed of. I believed her. She did too. But the sickness didn't wait for that to happen. Clara passed one morning just before dawn with her hands in mine. Her last words were, "Promise me you won't stop loving him, even if he changes." I nodded, and that was the hardest vow I've ever had to keep. Ryan came back for the funeral in an expensive suit and a tense look on his face. He didn't cry. He barely hugged me. "Dad, I have to get back soon," he told me at the end. "I have a big project at the firm." "You're already working?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, a design firm. It's important. I can't miss it." I didn't blame him. I thought it was his way of dealing with the pain. I didn't understand that it was actually his way of forgetting it. After that day, our calls got shorter and further between. He was always busy, traveling, designing, living. I was still in the same neighborhood, in the same old house with the same old kitchen table. My tools were getting rusty, but my hope wasn't. Every time I got my pension check, I'd put a little money aside. For when Ryan gets his house, I'd tell myself. And when he finally called to tell me he was moving, I felt my heart pound, like I was 20 again. I never imagined that joy would turn into this wound. That day, when he asked me not to go near the window, I remembered all the times I had lifted him onto my shoulders so he could see the world. I'd make him laugh. I'd say, "Look, son, from up here everything looks better." And he'd clap, his hands dirty with paint, without a care in the world if anyone saw him. What a cruel joke, I thought. Today, he's the one asking me to hide from the very world I taught him to look at. A father's love is a strange thing. It doesn't go out, not even when it's painful. It just turns into something deeper, quieter. Not hate, but a kind of sadness that gives you strength. That night, cleaning my brushes, I saw my hands reflected in the bucket of water. They were the same as always, tough, worn out, steady. But behind them, I also saw the shadow of the man my son had become, and I understood that in a way, I had built him too. He was my life's work, even if he wanted to tear it down now. I didn't sleep. I spent hours thinking about how unfair love can be, how you give your entire life for someone who, in the end, doesn't even want your shadow. But between the anger and the pain, something inside me started to sort through the memories, to weave an idea. A need to make him see what humility, memory, and blood really mean. Not with yelling, not with guilt, but with something that would speak for itself, something that, even if he wanted to, he could never erase. And that was the first night I thought about leaving a mark on his wall, not just paint, but a mirror, one where he'd be forced to see himself as he truly was. I always thought poverty showed in your hands, in your clothes, in the way you talked. But over time, I discovered it also shows in other people's eyes, in how they look at you, in that glint of fake compassion that's more poisonous than an insult. That's what I saw in Caroline the first time I met her. My son brought her home one Sunday. I'd made a pot roast, the table was clean, and I even got out the good glasses we only used for birthdays. I wanted her to feel welcome. Ryan had warned me that she was from a good family and asked me not to make any weird comments. That phrase hurt more than it should have, but I pretended not to get it. I just answered, "Relax, son. I just want to meet the woman who makes you smile." When she arrived, I felt the air in the dining room change. Caroline was young, elegant, with that expensive perfume that leaves a trail even in the silence. She had a beautiful face, but cold, and that way of looking at things like she was calculating their price. She offered me her hand delicately, without squeezing. "A pleasure, Mr. Martin," she said, barely smiling. "The pleasure's all mine," I answered, wiping my hands on my apron. During the meal, she did most of the talking, about trips, restaurants, and her plans for the new house. Ryan looked at her, fascinated, as if every word she said was another goal to achieve. I, on the other hand, watched her closely. Not because her attitude bothered me, but because I saw something in her that was familiar, a kind of pride that isn't earned, but imitated. At one point she asked, "And what did you do for a living, Mr. Martin?" "I was a handyman my whole life. Painter, bit of drywall, some carpentry." She nodded, faking interest. "How nice," she said, with a smile that lasted about a second. "My father owns a construction firm. Maybe you two would have gotten along." Her comment wasn't cruel, but it had an edge. Ryan didn't say anything, just looked down at his plate. I understood then that it wasn't my son speaking for himself anymore. It was her, shaping his voice, his clothes, his dreams, his shame. After lunch, we went out to the backyard. She looked at the ground, the old flower pots, the concrete benches. "How quaint," she commented. "It looks like something from an old movie." "Yep," I replied. "Everything here was made by hand." She smiled with her lips, not her eyes. "Right," she said. "You can tell." I knew right then that for her, my world was a museum of failure. And yet, something inside me lit up, because what she saw as ruins, I saw as history. Every crack held a memory, every stain on the wall a sacrifice. But they would never see that, not as long as their love depended on appearances. That afternoon, after they left, the house felt emptier than ever. The smell of her perfume still hung in the air, as if to remind me that my poverty had been judged. I sat in the chair where she had been and saw the faint ring from her glass on the table. It was perfect, round, clean. And I thought about how my son had fallen in love with just that, cleanliness, brightness, a reflection that doesn't show the truth. A few weeks passed before I saw them again. That's when he asked for help with the painting. I remember his excitement as he talked about the color of the walls, the kitchen design, the furniture they were going to buy. Caroline wasn't there, but everything he said had her signature on it. Every sentence was an echo of her words. He'd changed how he talked, how he dressed, how he walked. Even the way he looked at me was different. The affection was gone, replaced by a mix of pity and distance, like he was looking at a memory he wanted to escape from. I listened to him, smiling, while my mind traveled back in time to when he used to run around the backyard in a torn t-shirt, covered in dust, begging me to teach him how to paint. "Dad, let me try," he'd say, laughing, his hands full of color. I realized then that that boy was still in there somewhere, hidden inside the man who was now talking about Italian light fixtures and Persian rugs. But he was trapped, and Caroline was the cage. One afternoon, when we went to a furniture store, I noticed something. She picked things out without looking at the price, and he pretended not to care. But I knew that look. It was the same one I used to make when Clara wanted to buy something nice, and I knew we couldn't afford it. The difference was, I did it out of love. He was doing it out of shame, out of fear of not looking good enough for her. As we left, she looked at me politely. "Mr. Martin, thank you for coming with us. Ryan told me you have a good eye for color." "Well, it comes from years of looking at walls," I replied with a calm smile. "Then I'm trusting you with the living room. I want something modern, nothing dated." Her gaze lingered on my worn-out work boots, and I understood exactly what she meant. I was the dated thing. That night, while we were painting together, he would repeat the words that would break my heart. But this time, I understood where they came from. They weren't his. They were hers. From her world of appearances, from her need to erase anything humble, to dress up life in luxury to hide the shame. And that's when something inside me changed. I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling a sense of purpose, because I understood it wasn't enough for my son to remember me as the poor old man. He needed to remember me as the man who showed him what poverty can't take away, the truth. And in that moment, as I wiped my hands on a rag, I knew I wasn't just going to paint a house anymore. I was going to paint a lesson. The sun streamed through the new windows, reflecting off the freshly plastered walls. The house smelled of fresh paint, of someone else's hope, of new beginnings that didn't belong to me. I had a roller in my hand and a mix of exhaustion and pride in my chest. At my age, being able to help my son build his home felt almost like starting a new life. Or at least, I wanted to believe that. Ryan was measuring a door frame, the tape measure dangling from his wrist. He was wearing a spotless white t-shirt, clean jeans, and that air of superiority he had learned from Caroline. I, on the other hand, was wearing my old overalls, with Martin stitched on the chest patch and a cap that hadn't been white in years. My hands were stained with sky blue paint, and my chapped skin burned from the paint thinner. But it didn't matter. I was happy to see him there, to hear him say, "Hand me that, Dad," even if it was with reluctance. I didn't know that day would end with me painting something more than walls. I ran the roller over the last strip of the wall, making sure not to leave any lines. The blue color reminded me of Clara's eyes, and the color of the sky when Ryan was a boy. It was then that I went near the window to wipe down the edges with a damp rag. The glass shined. I could see my reflection, an old, tired man, but still standing. And for a second, I felt useful again, a part of his world. "Dad," he said without looking at me. "Yeah, son?" "Get away from the window." "Why?" I asked, turning my head slightly. "If someone passes by and sees you, they'll know I'm the son of some poor old man." It wasn't a yell. It was worse. It was a whisper, full of shame, said like he was spitting out a stain. The roller trembled in my hand. A drop of paint hit the floor, leaving an irregular mark like a tear on the new wood. I didn't know what to say. I felt the air stop, the blood rush to my head. The silence that followed was so loud that even the clock in the hallway seemed to stop ticking. Ryan kept painting, pretending he hadn't said anything, as if his words hadn't just opened a wound that could never be closed. I stepped back from the window. I stood still, the roller in my hand, staring at my paint-covered shoes. I didn't cry. At my age, you don't cry. You just crack on the inside, like old walls that stay standing even if no one repairs them. I kept working. I passed the roller over and over without thinking, without talking. The paint was drying, but my soul was filling with invisible cracks. Every stroke was a breath held in, an apology I would never say, a love that no longer knew how to show itself. When I finished, I went to the bucket. I rinsed the roller and watched the water turn blue. The color dissolved slowly, just like the patience of a father who is beginning to understand that respect isn't inherited. I stood there, watching the ripples in the water, mesmerized. I saw my reflection, and behind it, his, young, proud, his gaze fixed on his phone, and I understood something terrible. My son no longer saw me as a father. He saw me as an embarrassment. Caroline arrived a little later, carrying a bag of food and a catalog smile. When she saw me, she barely pursed her lips. "Oh, Mr. Martin, you've got paint on your shoe," she said. "Yeah, it happens," I replied. "Ryan, tell him to be careful." He didn't say anything, just hung his head, uncomfortable. I pretended not to hear, but inside, I felt something switch off. We sat on the floor to eat since the furniture hadn't arrived. She talked about curtains, lamps, the upcoming housewarming party. I barely touched my food. My son laughed at her comments, though his laugh sounded forced. And I thought about the times I had fed him when we had nothing, about the nights I worked until dawn so he could study, about the promises I made to him in front of his mother's casket. And I realized I had kept all of them except one. I hadn't taught him to be grateful. When they left, I was alone in the house. The silence was so deep I could hear the echo of my own footsteps. I went back to the window. The evening light came in like a caress, turning the dust in the air to gold. I ran my fingers over the freshly painted frame and thought of Clara. If someone sees you, the words bounced around in my mind. They hurt more than any sickness, more than any injury. But along with the pain, something started to burn. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. That was the exact moment I understood I shouldn't answer with anger, but with truth. That words are forgotten, but what is shown remains. And that the time had come to teach my son a lesson he couldn't erase with the most expensive paint in the world. I took my roller, put it in my tool bag, and stopped before leaving. I looked at the blue wall, still damp, and pressed my hand against it. I left a faint handprint, an almost invisible mark. I smiled, because I knew that wouldn't be the last one. That night I walked home under the clearest sky I could remember, and even though my hands were shaking, my mind was steady. I had found my way. My son had shamed me in front of a window. I was going to teach him how to see through one. There are silences that speak louder than words, and in my neighborhood, even the silence has a voice that hides behind the blinds, that whispers from the corners, that watches without asking. After that day at my son's house, that was the voice that walked home with me. I walked slow, my toolbox in one hand and the blue-stained roller in the other. The sun was setting on the old roofs, painting the streets with that golden color that only shows up when the workday is done. Every neighbor I passed greeted me with a small smile, but in their eyes I saw something more. Curiosity, compassion, maybe pity. They knew I was helping Ryan paint his new house, and maybe they also knew, because words fly in small neighborhoods, that something between us had broken. "How's the work coming, Mr. Martin?" asked Mrs. Gable from the corner store. "Good, good," I lied with a smile that hurt my face. "Your son is so lucky to have you," she said, not knowing that her words were like daggers wrapped in kindness. I nodded and kept walking. I didn't have the strength to keep pretending. When I got to my house, I dropped the toolbox on the floor and just stood in front of the door. The paint on the front was peeling, the doorknob was loose, and the wind made the windows moan. It was an old house, but it was mine. I had laid every brick with my own hands. Every crack told a story. And yet, that afternoon, for the first time, I saw it through my son's eyes as something that didn't shine, that wasn't impressive, that wasn't worth showing. It hurt to think that. But pain is sometimes the wisest teacher, because just when you feel your smallest, your soul starts to grow on the inside. I turned on the old kitchen radio. An old jazz standard was playing, the kind Clara loved. The melody filled the air and forced me to remember her laugh, our lunches, the Sundays, the birthdays with Ryan blowing out candles while I held the cake with plaster on my hands. All of it was still alive in my memory, even if my son had decided to bury it under layers of shame. I poured a glass of water and sat at the table. I looked at my hands, the same ones that had painted his house. They were ugly, yes, but they were real. And then a thought came to me, so clear it almost scared me. If he's ashamed of my hands, then he's going to learn what they're capable of creating. The next day, I went out early. The air smelled like fresh bread and damp earth. Some neighbors said hello, Others just watched me. The news was already out that Ryan was moving up, that he lived in a new neighborhood, that his girlfriend was a real lady. And I, meanwhile, was the old handyman still wearing the same cap and the same worn-out work boots. But the funny thing was, despite the gossip, no one treated me with contempt. The neighborhood knew me. They knew who I was, where I came from, how hard I had worked, and that, in its own quiet way, held me up. Mrs. Peterson, the seamstress, stopped me on the sidewalk. "So, did you get it all painted?" she asked with that nosy but kind tone of hers. "Almost done," I replied. "Your son must be so happy." I smiled. "Yeah, he's happy." She looked at me hard, as if she could see right through my words. "You don't know, Mr. Martin," she said, lowering her voice, "but everyone here, we all look up to you. There are few fathers like you." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and walked away with a lump in my throat. That night, as I was getting into bed, I thought about her words. Few fathers like you. I didn't know whether to feel pride or sadness, because in the end, what good was it being a good father if your own son couldn't see it? Sleep wouldn't come. I went out to the backyard and looked up at the sky. It was a full moon. On the back wall, an old photo was still hanging. Clara, Ryan, and me at his grandparents' house. His hands were covered in paint, and he was smiling at me with the innocence of someone who doesn't know shame. I touched the photo. The paper was worn, but the faces were still there. That image gave me an idea, small but intense. I didn't know how or when, but I had to do something. Something to remind him who he was and where he came from. Not with anger, but with truth. The days passed slowly. Ryan didn't call. I kept up with my routines, sweeping the yard, watering the plants, fixing what was broken. Sometimes while I was sanding a piece of wood or mixing paint, I'd think about him, about how I raised him, everything I gave him, how I protected him from the world so he could dream. And now he was returning the favor by hiding me from his world. But fate, if you know how to wait, always leaves you clues. One afternoon, while I was painting a bench for the town square, a kid from the neighborhood came up to me. "Are you Mr. Martin, the architect's dad?" he asked, curious. "Yes, son, that's me." "My dad says you're a genius with your hands." I smiled. That simple, honest compliment was the push I needed. I went back to the house with a different kind of energy. I went into the garage, opened the old trunk where I kept my tools, and saw something I hadn't touched in years. A rolled-up canvas, a box of brushes, and a jar with the dried-up remains of oil paint. There it was. The answer. That night, under the yellow light of the garage bulb, I spread the canvas out on the table. My hands were shaking, but not from exhaustion. It was excitement. I looked at the empty canvas and whispered to myself, "If shame is born from what we forget, then, son, I'm going to teach you how to remember." And with the first stroke of paint, the entire neighborhood, without knowing it, witnessed the beginning of my quietest, most beautiful revenge. A work that would speak for me when I no longer had a voice. I never thought opening that old trunk would be like opening a wound. I'd kept it stored for years in a corner of the garage covered in a tarp. It was the same trunk Clara and I had bought the day Ryan was born, to keep his first things, his drawings, his toys, the utility bills paid with sacrifice, and the letters we wrote to each other when he went off to college. I had promised not to touch it again after she died, but that night, something pushed me to. The lock was rusted shut. I had to force it with an old putty knife. The screech of the metal sounded like a mournful cry. When I opened it, the smell of old paper and stored memories filled my eyes with tears. I gently touched each object, as if the past could break if I held on too tight. There was a scarf Clara had knitted, yellowed with time, a notebook where Ryan had written his name in crooked letters, and at the bottom, a cardboard folder tied with string. Inside were the photographs, not many, because we were never camera people, but each one was a universe. Ryan in his school uniform, with the torn-up sneakers he said were his lucky shoes. Ryan in the park eating ice cream and laughing his head off. And then, the most special one, Ryan, Clara, and me. All three of us covered in paint the day we finished painting our first house. The photo was stained in one corner. I was holding a brush, Clara was laughing with a white smudge on her face, and little Ryan, he couldn't have been more than 6, was holding up his arms, proud, showing his colorful palms. It was pure happiness, trapped in an image, and on the back in my shaky handwriting, a phrase that hit me like a distant echo. Paint fades, but love sticks to the wall. I didn't remember writing that, but reading it, I felt like Clara was speaking to me from wherever she was. That phrase was hers, I'm sure of it. She always believed that the simple gestures, a hot meal, a caress, a kind word, were what really stuck to the soul. I stared at the photo for a long time under the garage lamp. Tears blurred my vision, but I wasn't crying from sadness. It was a mix of tenderness and clarity. I finally understood what I had to do. That image would be my answer. Not with yelling, not with guilt, but with art, with the very paint he now despised. I decided to transform it, not just copy it, but give it life, to tell with colors what words no longer could. The photo showed a family united by hard work. My painting would show a truth that can't be hidden or erased. I looked for my old oil paints, the ones I'd used years ago when I tried to learn from an old artist friend. The tubes were dry, but the paint was still good. I found brushes, rags, folded canvases. I'd forgotten how much I loved the smell of turpentine, that mix of cleaning and creation. I put the canvas on the workbench and taped the photo next to it. I looked at it in silence. Clara was smiling, and I felt like she was giving me permission. The next few days were different. I'd get up early, drink my coffee slowly, and sit in the garage. The radio played softly in the background. The sun streamed through the window, and I was in front of that blank piece of cloth, ready to fill the empty spaces in my soul with meaning. The first stroke was clumsy. My hand was shaking, my pulse unsteady. But little by little the color started to obey. The blue became sky again, the white became light, and the brown became earth. It was as if the memories themselves were pouring onto the canvas. To paint was to pray. Every brushstroke was an unsaid word, an apology I never heard, a touch I could no longer give. On that canvas, I saw my wife alive again, laughing, and my son innocent without any masks. It was a portrait of what we were, and also a mirror of what we'd lost. One afternoon, while I was painting Clara's eyes, I felt time stop. The wind came through the window and moved the photo. For a second, I thought I heard her voice. "Don't look for revenge, Alex. Just truth." I smiled because I understood that's exactly what I was doing. My painting wouldn't be a punishment. It would be a reminder, a way of giving Ryan back what he had forgotten, his origin. When I finished the first sketch, the sun had set. I turned on the lamp and just looked at it. The three of them were on the canvas, Clara, Ryan, and me. But it wasn't a copy. It was a confession. The boy smiled with purity, but behind him, the shadows of his future subtly loomed. Buildings, blueprints, money, and above all, loneliness. Next to him, Clara radiated light, as always. And me. I appeared just as I am now, old, tired, but with steady hands and eyes full of faith. It was more than a painting. It was a frozen story, a truth written in color. I covered the canvas with a sheet and let it dry. My heart was pounding like I'd run a marathon. I knew that somehow this painting would be my voice, my silent answer to my son's shame. And though I didn't know how or when I would show it, I felt the moment would come on its own. Life, when it has outstanding debts, always finds a way to collect. That night, I slept without resentment for the first time, because I understood that the deepest justice isn't demanded, it's painted. Painting at night feels like a confession, the silence of the neighborhood, the low hum of the streetlights, the distant bark of a dog. Everything seems to listen without judging. I'd wait for the clock to strike 11 to open the garage. I didn't want anyone to see me. Not out of shame, but because some things are done best when the world is asleep. My painting had become just that, a secret. The canvas, covered by a white sheet, rested on the table as if it were breathing. Every time I lifted the cloth, I felt Clara watching me from somewhere in the painting, approving every stroke. Sometimes she'd talk to me, or at least I thought I heard her. "Do it with love, Alex, not anger." And I did. Because revenge born from hate rots quickly, but revenge born from love, that leaves a mark. During the day, my life went on as usual. I'd buy bread, greet the neighbors, fix little things around the neighborhood, but at night, the world shrank until it fit on that rectangle of cloth and color. That was my refuge and my justice. Little by little, the portrait grew. It wasn't just a family painting anymore. It had become a complete story, a kind of intimate mural where every color said something I couldn't say with words. I added details that no one would understand at first glance, but that were full of meaning. In the background, I painted the old house where Ryan grew up, with its peeling walls and its window always open to the wind. In the corner, a clock with no hands, my way of saying that time when you truly love stands still. And in the center between Clara and little Ryan, my hands outstretched holding a paintbrush. But the brush wasn't touching the ground. It was painting the air, the emptiness, as if I was still building even when there was nothing left. One morning, around 3 a.m., as I was going over the outlines, I heard a knock on the garage door. My heart stopped. I turned off the lamp and stood perfectly still. "Dad?" a voice said from the other side. It was Ryan. I wasn't expecting him. I hadn't seen him since the day of the insult. I opened the door slowly. He was standing there, keys in hand, his face tired. "I was just in the neighborhood," he explained. "Wanted to see how you were." I nodded. "I'm fine, son. Same as always." He looked over my shoulder. "What are you doing up at this hour?" "Nothing, just couldn't sleep." "Oh," he said, and his gaze landed on the white sheet in the back. "What's that?" "An old project," I lied. "Can I see it?" "Not yet," he shrugged. "Okay. Well, Dad, it's good to see you." His voice sounded empty, as if the words weighed more than his exhaustion. "Caroline and I, well, things aren't going so great," he muttered. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the only answer that doesn't hurt. Before he left, he patted my shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "I always do." When he left, I went back to the canvas and lifted the sheet. His eyes, the ones in the painting, seemed to look at me more intensely than ever, and without knowing why, I added a new detail. A figure at the edge of the window, barely visible. An older man with a paintbrush in his hand. It was me, watching him from the outside. The father he wanted to hide, but who would always be there, watching. The days passed. The painting grew, and with it, my determination. I realized it wasn't enough to just paint it. I had to make it visible. I had to find a way for my son to see it, to be unable to avoid it. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because he needed to face his own truth. And there is no mirror more cruel or more fair than memory. One Sunday, I went to visit him. Caroline wasn't home. He was a little friendlier, though still with that distance that was now just part of how he spoke. "Want to come in, Dad?" I went in. The house was spotless but empty, cold. Everything was beige, symmetrical, perfect. Not a single photo, not a trace of childhood, not one mark of life. Just silence. I sat on the sofa and looked around. On the walls, abstract paintings with no soul. I thought about how ironic it was. All this space and not a single story hanging on the walls. He offered me coffee. While he was in the kitchen, I got up and walked through the living room. That's when I decided. My work wouldn't just be a painting. It would be an entire wall. A mural. The very wall he asked me not to touch. The irony was perfect. The lesson would be right there, where his shame began. In the living room, facing the window, the place where he'd asked me to hide. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started sketching how I'd do it. I measured proportions, calculated colors, and chose every symbol with precision. The portrait transformed into a major project, the secret work of my life. Something that didn't seek to humiliate, but to reveal. Love that is denied is still love, but it needs a voice. And mine would be art. That same night, I wrote a sentence in my notebook that would stay with me until the end. Some wounds don't heal by talking. They heal by painting. From then on, every brush I dipped in color was a word written with my soul. Sometimes I'd think about what Ryan would say when he saw it. Maybe he'd be angry. Maybe he'd be even more ashamed. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd understand that what I didn't do to punish him. I did it to remind him who loved him first. I looked at the painting in the early morning light. The sun came through the window, tracing gold on the faces in the canvas. And then, I knew I was ready. All that was left was the final step, the place, the moment, and the signature that would seal my truth. A single word, painted in the bottom right corner. Father. Going back to that house was like walking into a cold temple. Nothing smelled like a home, it just smelled new, like soulless paint, like silence. The curtains were drawn, the furniture covered in plastic, the symmetrical paintings hung on the walls as if someone had chosen them out of obligation. Everything was in order, but empty. Like my son's life, since he decided to erase his roots. I had waited for this moment with patience. I knew Ryan would be out of town. He'd mentioned it days before on the phone, with that distant politeness that strangers use when they still call each other dad and son out of habit. We're heading up north for 3 days with Caroline. It's for work, he said. I feigned surprise. That's great, son. Enjoy yourselves. But inside, I knew the time had come. That same night, I gathered my tools, my jars of paint, my brushes, and the finished canvas. Not to hang it, but to transfer it. My work wasn't going to stay in a frame. It was going to merge with the wall itself. It was going to be part of his house, his air, his history, whether he liked it or not. I got there early, before dawn. I still had my spare key. He'd never changed the locks. I entered slowly, respectfully, not as an intruder, but as someone returning to his own past. The echo of my footsteps resonated on the hardwood floors. I ran my fingers over the surfaces, cold, spotless, nothing spoke. Not one photograph, not one memory, just objects, silent witnesses to a manufactured life. I turned on a floor lamp and looked at the main wall of the living room. Large, white, perfectly smooth, right there, facing the window where he had asked me not to stand. I was going to leave my truth. I took out the canvas and leaned it on the table. I looked at it one last time. Clara, Ryan, and me, all of us smiling, covered in paint. That image, that purity, was what I was going to give back to him, but not as a simple painting, but as a mural, a living story that no ashamed son could ever cover up. I took a deep breath. I opened the jars. The smell of turpentine filled the room, and for a second, I felt time reverse. I felt Clara was with me, that my son was little again, laughing amidst the paint stains. I closed my eyes and began. The first stroke was long, sure, decisive. The blue of the sky I had once painted for his childhood, then the warm brown of our old house, Clara's hands, the boy's eyes. I painted slowly, without rushing, like a man praying. Every line had a meaning, every shadow a memory. The clock in the hallway ticked off the hours, but I didn't feel them. It was as if the entire night belonged to me. It was raining outside. The drops hit the glass and slid down like tears. Inside, the yellow light of the lamp illuminated the mural that was beginning to come to life. In the center, I painted the figure of little Ryan, with a brush in his hand, looking up, smiling. Next to him, Clara, surrounded by light, and behind them, my own figure, barely visible but steady, holding my brush with pride. There was no sadness in that face, only peace. Every stroke was a confession, every color a truth I couldn't keep silent. I was giving him back his history. I was teaching him without words that poverty wasn't a shame, but an inheritance of dignity. I stopped for a moment to look at the scene from a distance. The painting seemed to be breathing. The boy on the wall looked at me with tenderness, as if he recognized me. And then I understood something. This mural wasn't just for Ryan. It was for me too. A way to close the circle, to make peace with my own silence. I worked for 2 straight days. I ate little, slept almost, not at all. I only stopped when the sun came through the window, tracing gold on the painted faces. On the 3rd day, the mural was almost complete. Only one detail was left, the signature. I took a fine brush, dipped it in red paint, and in the bottom corner, I wrote one word that weighed more than my own name. Father. Nothing else. No last name, no explanation. Because being a father doesn't need a signature. I stepped back a few paces. The wall seemed to have a soul. It was as if the whole house was breathing differently. It was no longer an empty space. It was a testament, a memory impossible to ignore. I packed my things. Before I left, I sat for a moment in front of the mural, in silence. The rain had stopped. All I could hear was the faint drip of water from the gutters. I just stared at the painting of my life, the portrait no one asked me to make, but that my soul demanded. I smiled, because I knew I had done it, not with vengeance, but with love. With the love that is painted in silence, but is etched forever. I turned off the lamp, closed the door carefully, and walked out into the early morning with a peaceful heart. As I walked away, I realized something curious. Nothing hurt, not my body, not my soul. It was as if every stroke of that mural had healed an old wound. That morning when I got home, I turned on the radio. An old soul tune was playing. I poured some coffee and sat by the window. I looked at my paint-stained hands and thought, it's done. I didn't know how Ryan would react when he saw it. Maybe he'd be furious, maybe he'd cry. But something inside me said that when truth is painted with the heart, no heart can remain untouched. Justice doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as a painted wall, a mirror that doesn't lie, a love that endures even contempt. That was my way of speaking to him, of telling him that I'm still here, that a poor father isn't an embarrassment, but a reminder of everything a son forgets when he's blinded by pride. And so, with my hands still stained, I prayed in silence. Clara, my love, it's done. Our story is home again. The morning my son returned, the day dawned clear, almost serene. I woke up before dawn, without knowing why. The air smelled different, as if it sensed something important was about to happen. I made coffee, sat by the window, and waited in silence, my heart restless and my hands still stained with dried paint. I wasn't afraid, but I had a kind of internal tremor, like someone about to witness the destiny he himself had written. The hours passed. In the distance, I heard a car engine. I looked out and saw it, Ryan's gray car parking in front of the new house. He got out first with his usual expression of hurry and exhaustion. Then Caroline, impeccable, in her light-colored dress and dark sunglasses, carrying a bag with flowers. They looked like a postcard. Perfect. And I, from a distance, watched them with a mix of tenderness and sadness. That was my son, the same boy who once ran barefoot through the mud in our backyard. And now, without knowing it, he was about to look his own reflection straight in the face. I don't know what I felt first when they opened the door. Maybe the silence. A different, thick silence, as if the air in the house had weight. They walked in, laughing about something they were saying, and suddenly, they froze. I watched Caroline drop the flowers. The dry sound of the stems hitting the floor was the only thing that broke the silence. Ryan took a step forward, not understanding. His breathing changed. I watched him from the sidewalk across the street, right through the window. Yes, that same window, the one he asked me never to stand near. In front of them, on the white wall of the living room, was the mural, illuminated by the midday light. It looked alive. The paint vibrated. It breathed. The three of us were there, Clara, Ryan, and me. She, smiling. The boy, raising his brush to the sky. And me, behind them, watching with pride. The colors shined with a purity that hurt. The blue of the sky, the brown of the earth, the white of hope. And in the corner, my red signature, Father. Ryan put his hands to his head. No, that can't be, he muttered. Caroline took a step back. What is this? She asked, as if the painting were an offense. It's, he stammered. It's my father. She looked at him, confused. Your father? Yes, he said, almost in a whisper. He painted this. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He just kept staring at the wall, as if time had suddenly caught up with him. I, from the sidewalk, remained still. The wind rustled my shirt, but I didn't care. I felt my entire soul clench in my chest, not with pride, not with revenge. It was something bigger, the weight of a revealed truth. Inside the house, Caroline turned to him. And why would he do something like this? She asked, annoyed. Ryan didn't answer. He walked up to the mural. He touched the painted figure of his mother with his fingers. The color still seemed warm, as if it were breathing. Because I forgot who I am, he finally said, his voice low. What are you talking about? Look at it, Caroline, he whispered. This is my life. My father painted it with the hands I wanted to hide. The same hands that gave me everything. The same hands that built what I have. He paused, swallowing hard. And I despise them. She crossed her arms. Don't be so dramatic, Ryan. It's just a painting. He looked at her with a mix of anger and sadness. No, Caroline, it's not a painting. It's my shame hanging on the wall. And it's also his forgiveness. She didn't say another word. She turned and walked out of the living room. Her heels clicked on the floor like a death sentence. Ryan was left alone. I was still watching him from outside, through the glass, not daring to get closer. He knelt in front of the mural. He touched the word father with his fingertips. And as he did, he broke down. A quiet, choked sob, as if it hurt to breathe. And in that moment, everything he had held in for years seemed to collapse. I saw his body shake, his head bow. And I understood that he was no longer the proud man who had pushed me away from the window. He was my son again. I watched him for a long time. And then, something moved in me. Not the urge to go in, or to talk to him, or even to comfort him. Just a deep certainty. It was done. I didn't need to say anything. The wall was speaking for me. Art had done what love had not been able to. Reach his soul. I turned and walked away slowly. I didn't want him to see me. As I turned the corner, I heard a choked cry, his broken voice calling my name. Dad! But I didn't stop. Not because I didn't want to, but because I understood that call wasn't for me. It was for the man he himself had forgotten. And that man was now alive on the mural. Later, as the sun began to set, I returned home. I turned on the radio, poured a cup of coffee, and sat in silence. The phone rang. I looked at the screen. Ryan, I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because sometimes silence is the only way to let the other person hear what they never knew how to listen to. I let the phone ring until it stopped. That night, I slept deep. For the first time in years, without guilt. Because I understood that you don't have to destroy in order to teach. You just have to remember. And my mural was just that. A living memory. A lesson, painted with the soul. 2 days passed before Ryan dared to come see me. I knew it was him by his footsteps. I always recognized his walk, firm but with a slight drag at the end, as if the world weighed on his heels. That afternoon, I was in the backyard, sanding an old bench, when I heard the door open without a knock. I didn't turn around. I just kept working, letting the sound of the sandpaper fill the silence. Dad, he said, barely audible. I slowly looked up. He was standing there, his face pale, his eyes swollen. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn on his trip, but now it seemed too big for him. I looked at him without saying anything. The wind rustled the dry leaves on the ground, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Dad, I need to talk to you, he repeated. I nodded. Talk. He hesitated. I don't know what I was doing. That day, with the paint, the window, he took a shaky breath. I was an idiot. I didn't try to deny it. I just kept looking at him. He looked down. I saw the mural, he said. I saw Mom. His voice broke. I never thought a wall could hurt so much. I stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. It wasn't meant to hurt you, son. I know, he whispered. That's why it hurts more. He took a few steps closer. I don't know when I became someone who could be ashamed of you. You gave me everything. You taught me how to work, how to get up when I fall, and I wanted to hide you. We're not going to talk about the past, I said softly, but I need to ask you to forgive me. You don't have to ask me for anything, Ryan. Yes, I do. His voice trembled, because I realized something. I wasn't ashamed of you. I was ashamed of me, forgetting who I was. His words landed slowly, heavy, true. I watched him, feeling that the boy who once painted with me was slowly coming back, underneath that skin of a regretful adult. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. My hands were rough, but steady. Son, I said, we all forget who we are sometimes. The important thing is to remember in time. He looked up, tears held back, but a different light in his eyes. I went to the house, he continued. I sat in front of the mural all night. I couldn't stop looking at it. At first, I felt shame. Then, gratitude. Because I finally understood what you were trying to tell me without saying it, that love isn't painted with words, but with sacrifice. His sentences pierced me like sweet knives. I looked at him and smiled, just barely. Then the mural served its purpose. And what was that? He asked through his tears. To remind you that you can't wash away your blood with money, that no new house can ever erase the home where you learned how to love. Ryan took a deep breath, took one more step, and without thinking, he hugged me. It was an awkward hug, the hug of a grown man becoming a son again for a moment. It took me a few seconds to respond. When I did, I felt all the years of distance dissolve in that one gesture. The air smelled like paint, like wood, like memory. We stayed like that, in silence, for a long time. Until he murmured, "I want you to come with me, Dad." "Where?" "To the house. I want you to live with me." I shook my head, smiling. "No, son. I've already painted everything I needed to paint. The house is yours now, and what I left you can't be erased." He looked down, understanding. "Then at least let me come see you every week." "That you can do," I said, "but bring your own paintbrush. It's been a while since we painted together." Ryan laughed through his tears, and that simple human sound was the most beautiful music I'd heard in years. When he left, I watched the door close. The sun was setting behind the wall, painting the sky orange and gold, and I thought that sometimes life is just that, painting over the wounds until you can see the love again. They say time erases everything. That's not true. Time only reveals what's worth keeping. And what Ryan and I rebuilt after that hug was just that, the essential. We were no longer a father and son separated by shame, but two men learning, from the silence, how to forgive each other. He started coming by on Sundays. At first, he didn't stay long. We'd have coffee in the backyard, talk about simple things, work, the weather, the neighbors. Avoiding the past was a way of not breaking the newfound peace, but over time, the conversations became easier, longer, more honest. One day he told me, "I went to the old neighborhood, Dad." "Oh yeah?" I asked, not looking up from my coffee. "Yeah, I walked past the house where I grew up. The walls are still standing, but the color is faded." "Just like me," I answered, smiling. He laughed, and that laugh erased years of distance. From then on, something new started. Ryan didn't just visit alone. He'd bring brushes, rollers, cans of paint. "Let's make your house look good, Dad," he'd say, and I'd let him, watching in silence as the same son who once shamed me for my stained hands now imitated them with pride. His movements were clumsy at first, but full of tenderness. Every time he passed the roller over the wall, I saw the boy I was once able to teach, the same one who had forgotten his roots but who was now painting them back with his own hands. One afternoon, while we were working together, Ryan stopped. "You know, Dad," he said, "I've been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," I replied, and we both laughed. "I want to do something more with the mural." "Like what?" "I don't want to erase it or cover it. I want to open the house to other people, let them see it, let them know who you were." "That's not necessary, son," I said. "Yes, it is. Because if I learned anything from you, it's that honest work deserves to be seen. And that mural isn't just a story, Dad. It's your life. It's our heritage." I just stared at him. For the first time, I understood that I didn't need justice or redemption. I already had it, standing right in front of me. My son wanted to honor what he once wanted to hide, and that was worth more than any apology. In the months that followed, Ryan kept his promise. He restored the house. He left the mural untouched. He put up a small plaque next to it with a sentence engraved on it, "Paint fades, but love sticks to the wall." When I saw it, I felt a lump in my throat. It was the same sentence written on the back of that old photo that inspired everything. The circle had closed. Carolyn wasn't in his life anymore. I knew it from him, though he never mentioned details. He just said, "Some people can't handle the truth," and I understood perfectly. Sometimes sincerity scares off those who live on appearances, but in his eyes, there was no longer resentment, only peace. He had learned the lesson that life had painted on his own wall. Over time, the house became a meeting place. Kids from the neighborhood would come by to see the mural. Ryan would explain to them who the man who painted it was. He was my father, he'd say with pride. I'd listen from the back, without interrupting, my heart full. Every word he spoke was one more brick in the rebuilding of our love. One evening, as the sun was setting, he came over and handed me something, a new paintbrush. "This is for you, Dad." "What for?" I asked. "So you can keep painting. There are still walls that need color." I smiled. "No, son. It's your turn now. I've already painted what I needed to." He stood quiet, looking at the horizon. Then he put the brush on the table and said, "Then I'll paint for you." And he did. From that day on, every Sunday, we'd paint together. It didn't matter what. A door, a fence, an old wall in the neighborhood. The important thing was the gesture, the bond, the paint-stained hands, one next to the other. Father and son at peace again. I learned something in that time. Forgiveness isn't spoken, it's painted. And when the soul is cleansed, even the dullest color shines again. Sometimes, while we worked, I'd feel Clara's presence between us. The wind would move the curtains, the leaves would dance, and the smell of fresh paint filled the air. It was her way of telling us she was happy. And I, looking at my son, would just think, it was worth every brushstroke, every tear, every silence. Because sometimes, the true legacy isn't the things we leave hanging on the walls, but the handprints we leave on the hearts of those who learn to see differently. Sometimes I think life is like a freshly painted wall. At first it shines, then it dulls, and over the years it starts to show the marks of time. But if you look closely, between the cracks, there's always something beautiful left. The story of everything it endured without falling. A few days ago, Ryan finished painting the last wall in the neighborhood. I watched him from the shadow of the porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, and a quiet soul. His movements were firm, confident. He was no longer the young man afraid of getting his hands dirty. Now, every stroke he made was an act of love. And as I watched him, I understood that nothing more needed to be said. Everything I ever wanted to teach him was right there, in that repeated, silent gesture, painting as if asking for forgiveness and giving thanks at the same time. The sun was beginning to set. The air smelled like fresh paint and damp earth. Ryan came over, wiped his hands on a rag, and sat down next to me. "You know, Dad," he said, "when I was a kid, I thought stained hands were for poor people. Now I understand they're for people who are alive." I looked at him and smiled. "And for people who love," I replied. He nodded. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Since then, I no longer dream about what hurt me. I dream of new walls, of clean brushes, of laughter echoing between the bricks. The mural in his house is still there, intact. Sometimes the neighbors tell me they look at it when they pass by and they feel something in their chest, a kind of calm, as if they're remembering something they had forgotten. That's enough for me. Because I've learned that art, like love, doesn't seek recognition. It seeks to remain. Every morning when the sun comes through my window and hits my hands, I see the complete story of my life in them. Hands that built, that held, that trembled, and that, in the end, taught. There is no greater pride, no more beautiful home than that of forgiveness. Today, as I write these last lines, I feel my story is finished, not with a period, but with a brushstroke. The last one, the softest one, the one that doesn't fade. Because even if the years quiet my voice and time stills my hand, I know that every wall I painted, every color I left behind, and every person's gaze I touched with my hands will still be there. And if one day my son remembers me, or someone sees my mural and stops for a second, I only want them to think one thing, that a poor man doesn't leave money. He leaves behind colors, and with them, he leaves love. Sometimes words are not enough, and only silence, colors, and memories can tell what the heart keeps quiet. Alex taught us that a father can't be erased, that even as time passes and walls wear down, true love always leaves its mark. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. If this story touched you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep sharing stories that remind us that love, when it's real, paints our lives forever.